Good morning, dear students. This is the second session on the story Barn Burning written by William Faulkner. In this session, we are having a discussion on the structure and style of the story, the setting of the story, and the major themes the story deals with. So first of all, let's have a discussion on the structure and style of the story. Faulkner is known for his distinctive style, especially his use of long sentences that are frequently interrupted by clauses. For example, the lengthy second sentence of Barn Burning would be considered typical Faulkner. This unique style lends Faulkner's work a sense of scope and continuity. Faulkner seems to suggest that human understanding and perception are unstable and always changing, subject to the environment and other people. This style also suggests a lack of clear resolution to the action. For example, at the end of Barn Burning, Sartorius has finally escaped his father's clutches, but we are left with an unresolved sense of the impact that Sartorius' escape will ultimately have on him and his family. Faulkner's syntax refers to the way a sentence is put together. So Faulkner's syntax helps contribute to this lack of definitive conclusion because many of his sentences meander and digress before ending, sometimes to the extent that we forget how the sentence began. This technique adds complexity to Faulkner's fiction, which he intended to reflect the struggles faced in everyday world, struggles that usually don't have clear resolutions. Faulkner's long looping sentences form a stream of consciousness style in which a character's roving thoughts and associations are reproduced on the page. The opening paragraph is a key example of this style. The second sentence spills out each subsequent clause, modifying the observations and thoughts that have come before it, ultimately forming a chain of loosely connected impressions and ideas. In real life, thoughts are not linear, and Faulkner represents the chaotic quality of private thought by interrupting the flow of the sentence with clauses. The sentence thus gives us a peek into Sartorius' soaring sensory impressions, revealing much more than simply his observations of what's around him. Sartorius' impressions reflect the hunger, fear, and guilt he feels, an impoverished child watching his father's hearing from the back of a general store. The sight and smell of the foods surrounding Sartorius remind him of his empty stomach, which then leads him to consider more abstract concerns, such as his sadness and struggle to sustain his family loyalty. Now let's have a discussion on the setting of the story. In this short story, Faulkner uses setting to evoke the class distinctions that fuel Snobs' deep resentment. The Snobs family live in dire circumstances that are vastly different from the lifestyle of the land-owning families for whom they work as sharecroppers. And the story hinges on Snobs' destruction of property and violation of the home. Once content with avenging perceived injustices by burning a landowner's barn, thus compromising his livelihood, Snobs begins avenging the vague wrongs that he feels he has endured simply by virtue of his poverty. At the Despain's opulent home, for example, he rudely forces his way inside, staining the red with horse manure, and then destroying it when he is ordered to clean it. He is avenging nothing. The Despains were strangers when he walked into the house. Strangers who had chosen to allow Snobs to reside on their property and share crop on their land. The story setting, including the Snobs' packed wagon and the expensive Despain estate, highlights the outsider status of the Snobs family and ignites Snobs' rage. Another unique aspect of the setting in Barn Burning is the courthouse, which is simply a general store that is used for legal proceedings. This is the place where justice is meted out to Snobs, where he is punished for avenging the injustices he believes he has endured. The fact that the courthouse isn't a real courthouse just augments Snobs' perception that he isn't treated fairly, and it highlights his status as a rogue outsider. His own vigilant justice is punished in a haphazard fashion within the law but also outside it. The idea of a courthouse that isn't a courthouse appears again when Sartori first sees the Despain home. It's big as a courthouse, Sati thinks to himself as the house comes fully into view. Because the only courthouse Sartori has seen is likely the inside of the general store. The courthouse to which he compares the house is simply an image he has created in his imagination. His comparison suggests how removed Sartori is from the world beyond the small sharecropping community in which the Snobs family lives. That's all about the setting of the story. Now let's have a small discussion on the major themes the story deals with. The first theme is loyalty to family versus loyalty to the law. In barn burning, Sartori must decide whether loyalty to family or loyalty to the law is the moral imperative. For the Snobs family, particularly for Sartori's father, family loyalty is valued above all else. The family seems to exist outside of society and even outside the law, and their moral code is based on family loyalty rather than traditional notions of right and wrong. Snobs tells Sartori that he should remain loyal to his blood or family or he will find himself alone. This threat suggests how isolated the family really is and how fully they rely on one another for protection, even when their faith in this protection is unfounded. Blood in a literal sense appears as well, underscoring the intensity of the ties among family. For example, when the Snobs are leaving the makeshift courthouse at the beginning of the story, a local boy accuses Snobs of being a barn burner, and when Sartori whirls around to confront him, the boy hits Sartori and bloodies his face. The blood dried and caked on his face during the ride out of town is in a way a mark of pride. Sartori had defended the family name. However, after Snobs once again plans to burn a barn, Sartori understands that family loyalty comes at too great a cost and is too heavy a burden. He rejects family loyalty and instead betrays his father, warning Despain that his barn is about to be burnt. Only when Snobs is killed, presumably shot to death by Despain at the end of the story, is the family free. They were loyal, but they still wind up alone. The next major theme the story deals with is the search for peace. Surrounded by violence and conflict, Sati is constantly overwhelmed by fear, grief, and despair. And he knows that he must search for peace if he ever wants to be free from these tumultuous emotions. Sartori specifically refers to fear, grief, and despair throughout the story, revealing the depth of his struggle to find a place among the demands of his family and his own developing ideas of morality. To Sartori, peace, joy, and dignity are the alluring promises of a different kind of life, one that seems very far away from life in the Snobs household. His sense that a different kind of life exists grows particularly acute when he and Snobs approach Despain's house. Sartori is enamored with the grounds and the imposing house and the domestic bliss that seems to emanate from the estate that gives Sartori a temporary comfort. The spell of the house seems to change everything, and Sartori foolishly hopes that it has the power to turn his father from his criminal ways. For the first time, Sartori has glimpsed a peaceful future. Although Sartorius eventually frees himself from his father and his oppressive family life. He doesn't immediately find the peace and dignity that he expected would await him. Perhaps the happiness he seeks does exist for him in the future as he leaves his family and old life behind without looking back. However, Sartorius has found a quieter, more subtle form of happiness. Life under his father was lived in a heightened state of extreme fear, grief, and despair. Now the extreme emotions that loomed over Sartorius' young life have eased. His life may not have undergone a radical transformation, but grief and despair were now no longer terror and fear, but just grief and despair. Sartorius can't escape entirely, but he has already achieved a kind of peace. So that's the end of this session, and in this session we have discussed the setting of the story, the major themes the story deals with, and the structure and style of the story. Thank you.